Yo, peoples, what's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by. Also, the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. We are going big time gaming talk here today. I am one of the biggest Pandemic fans that you'll ever meet. You'll see my wall in the background if you're watching the video show. Pandemic all over the place. It is always my pleasure to meet somebody who is just as big a Pandemic fan as I am. They reached out to me. And they wanted to talk about just have a whole chat about it and rank all the pandemics. I did this a couple of years ago, but this was 4 or 5 releases ago. So it's always good to keep this kind of things updated and fresh. And I'm always want to welcome chats about Pandemic game system. He is from Amass Games. Go ahead and check out his YouTube channel. We'll have a link to that in the show notes below. He is Simon Lavender from across the pond. Welcome to the show.
Hi there, Jason. Thanks so much for having me. Yes, and welcome back everyone who saw me on the stream with Steve previously. Yes, big fan, obviously, of co-ops and specifically of the Pandemic series. It took a while to get to a certain number. I won't tell you exactly how many we're up to that we're going to be comparing today presently. But yes, very much to finally get that last nugget in place to ensure that I could reach out and ensure it was Jason that I am comparing my list with. And it's very hot. It is the summer over here in the UK as well. And it is in Fahrenheit. I know you guys over across the pond in your direction, it's like 120 plus, and it's rather hot wearing clothing right now, especially in the UK when we don't tend to have air conditioning. So yeah, it's very hot. I'm upstairs and hopefully we'll get through this. But obviously, this has been recorded during kind of the COVID pandemic going ahead. So all respect to everyone out there, and hopefully you will enjoy this list.
If Simon actually melts during the stream, you will know why. It is so hot. And I'm pretty blessed. It's only like in a Fahrenheit 70s, which I guess would be like 20 Celsius or something like that.
Yeah.
It's actually really nice. Over here, I feel really bad for the American South. I feel really bad for parts of Europe. They're just like struggling right now, but it is worth it because we are talking about our this is my favorite game. Like the Pandemic system game is my #1 game of all games. Do you share in that, or is that where does the Pandemic in general locate for you?
Sure. So as Steve, for those who have seen my stream of that, basically I was talking to you about how much I do play co-op games. I've played over 265 co-ops to date, reviewed over 2,000 games in total. And in terms of games I've played multiple times, which are co-ops, there's over 45 games I've played over 25 times. And there are a number of pandemics in there. There is, well, obviously we're talking about the base game of Pandemic. We're going to be talking about the various other types of iteration. We won't be talking about the expansions necessarily, but we will be talking about them maybe a little bit up front. But there is one legacy system I've played through more than once, and that's going to be going again and again. So yes, I do highly rate it. I will be giving you my ratings overall. My average rating for any board game, which is relatively harsh, Stephen Bonicore thinks, is around 6.35, and only one of the Pandemic titles I give below that. So yes. That shows you how much I do very much enjoy Pandemic as an idea, as a mechanism, as a game, as an experience, and I think the duration plays a great part of it, as well as the difficulty levels, obviously easy, medium, hard, which I'll be talking to you again as we talk about the various titles.
Very few of my Pandemics rate below 7, just to give you some context.
Equally,
okay.
Yeah.
So I have 13 products listed here. Simon has a few more, so we're going to let Simon go. I think you went 16 deep, right?
So we haven't included expansions. I think I might talk about them briefly, but I know you have more experience with expansions than I do in particular. There's only one that I've actually rated class as an expansion, but that's partly because of how to play the game, which we'll talk about when we get onto that position. The novel we're not talking about, but I have read the novel, so played the novel, and it's very much like Pandemic. It's very fun. You have a researcher, you have a dispatcher, you have the medic, you have the quarantine specialist. You are literally almost handing cards to each other, which is very cool how they've done that. So very enjoyed that. But speaking about number 15, which will, I'm sure, be in Jason's list, because I'm seeing obviously some games behind him there, is a game which it wasn't terrible. I preferred Fuse. It's the only game I'm giving a 6 out of 10 to. It might have been an experience, and that is Rapid Response. Mm-hmm. So any views on that currently before we move on?
Well, you can go ahead and explain yours, and then when I get to the Rapid Response is on my list, but
cool.
So we'll get to that when we
nice.
So your 15 is Rapid Response.
And then number 14 is a 7 out of 10. So we're starting off now above my average, and it's an okay dice game in Pandemic series. It's 7 out of 10. I generally go a bit more deep into my decimals, but I won't initially, and that is The Cure.
Sure.
Okay, so in at 13, as the host, do you want to start?
I'll start it off. All right,
Okay.
so my number 13. So we're going 13-1 over here, and we'll obviously is going to be overlap because we're reading the same things, but we're going to surprise each other a little bit. So my number 13 is Pandemic Contagion, and that is number 13 with a bullet. That is the it actually came out really early. They didn't know what they had with Pandemic. Like, they didn't know that it was the co-op-ness of Pandemic that was popular. So like Contagion was like, okay, well, Pandemic's a popular brand, so we're going to release branded games in this Pandemic system, and they release it. It's this kind of competitive area control thing where you're trying to infect the world. And it's a fine game. It's a perfectly cromulent game. I'm not going to say it's like bad or anything. If someone lays it down, it's like, all right, well, it works. Not something I'm going to draw. Not something I'm going to seek out. The theme obviously is not something that resonates with me like really hard, and really it's because the theme is so difficult. Like as a game itself, this area control kind of like putting cubes on cards type thing, it's not bad. It's just that's not why I play Pandemic. So Pandemic Contagion 13 with a bullet.
Okay, cool. So in terms of us talking about our lists in advance, I know there's something that we're curious to maybe discuss, and you kind of eye rolled, and I was like, now let's see if we can do it straight into the video and see how we get proper, cool first time reactions. Now, there's a game very like Plague Inc., and it is my 13. It's a good entry. It's 7 out of 10 for me, and it's also Contagion.
Right.
I'll cross over already. So I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. It could be a bad thing in the sense that obviously lots of people agree, maybe with us about it, I don't know. But the fact that we started with 13 as an overlap, I think is quite interesting how great minds think alike, perhaps.
Right.
Obviously, Divergence is great.
Although I'm a little, I had to bite my tongue a little bit about Pandemic, the dice game. The fact that it's still there should tell you that's a little bit higher on my list. But so it's not going to be a perfect kumbaya. But yeah, it's not. It's a solid game. It's not why people engage with the system. And the fact that they never followed up on it, there's no further contagions. They never made any other competitive Pandemics after this to tell you everything you need to know. But having said that, give it a shot. It's not terrible. So whatever.
No, exactly.
All right. So my number.
Sorry, still your 7. Yeah, you still gave it at least a 7 out of 10.
Oh, Contagion? No, Contagion's like a
okay.
It's like a 5.5.
Okay, rounding. Okay.
6. I get a 6. 6 will be fine. Okay, so my next one is 6.5. You mentioned it, rapid response. It's here somewhere. Is it here somewhere? It's somewhere.
Maybe not.
It's up there. Yeah. It's right up there. I'm not gonna hold on. Wait a minute. Take my word for people. It's in there somewhere. Pandemic rapid response. Yes, Simon mentioned that it is real time, kind of Fuse and Flatline from King Klinko, that the same designer. Again, not terrible. Real time isn't a necessary draw for me. So that's fine. But I think the thing that bothered me about this Pandemic is that there's a mechanism, right? Like when you do Pandemic, there's always a push-pull. Like you do the short-term crisis and then long-term, have to cure the cures and everything. And that's exciting in base Pandemics. So like you're doing a disease, you're going all over around the world and all kind of stuff. In rapid response, the short-term thing you have to deal with this thing called waste. And so like you're rolling dice, and waste is something that you just kind of generate along the way that kind of mucks up your dice rolls. And you put them in a separate place, like a waste bin, and then you deal with it and move on. I just don't find that exciting at all. And it felt very mechanical. It felt like it was trying to solve a design problem as opposed to like kind of doing something really exciting and forward looking. So it's like, if I'm going to play a dice game, like I want it to be exciting. That's the whole point of dice. Is I want that sense of like, I don't want to have to sit there managing waste. That mechanically, thematically, just utterly took it away from me. So I still own it because they got me. They got me. They put Pandemic on the name, so I have to at least consider owning it.
Yeah.
But it is definitely number 12 for a real reason. So, and I don't, and like future, it's one of those things where it's like I have Contagion and rapid response, and then when a new Pandemic comes out, I'll be like, okay, where does it slot above these two things? I don't anticipate future releases going below those two products.
No, that's interesting. So my 12 is an interesting one because I think I would have probably given a lot higher rating than this. It's very highly regarded. I happen to be only the 6th person to play it after it kind of left Asmodee's HQ. So the chance to play it very early. And there was a bit of a queue. I was trying to get on the first table. Then I thought, if they're playing as a 5, maybe I'll try and hold off on a teach and maybe pick up a bit better. And it's a great tower defense game. If I think it's Pandemic meets Legends of Andor, which I'm a massive fan of Legends of Andor. And it's interesting and tough, and you need to work out the puzzling nature of it. I like the chaining element, and that is the game Fall of Rome. So that's your top of your list. Now, I'd normally give this much, much higher, but then having, I guess, reevaluated all my other listings of these, I just feel that there's a lot going on. And if I want to just play something like Pandemic, it's a co-op, but I think, and it's 7 out of 10, so I kind of listing it next to something else, which is quite of interest. But I just feel that it's very involving, and Pandemic isn't generally a particularly long game. It's an hour-ish, 45 minutes, maybe a bit less than that, or 20 minutes if you get knocked off early. But it's Fall of Rome is quite a different beast. And I'm not saying that's at all a bad thing. I've played very long co-ops, very 7-hour-long co-ops. But the fact is, sometimes it just doesn't necessarily, it doesn't grab me as like, yeah, I want to play this Pandemic right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. They wanted to evoke war game with that, and there's very few war games that play like a breezy 30 minutes. They want. I mean, again, Pandemic isn't going to be this kind of like full war game experience, but you got the dice, and you got the troop movements, and you got kind of different ways with the war response to you and everything. So, I mean, are you at all a high conflict player? I know you play a lot of co-ops, but I mean, do you like conflict games in general, war games in general, and did that create some of the difficulty for you?
So, I mean, Root obviously isn't a co-op, but obviously there's a huge amount of conflict in that one.
Right, yeah.
I do like conflicts, although I do like conflict with some negotiation, perhaps, or something else to it, rather than just I happen to be there. And I think area control isn't something I'm generally a fan of. I mean, I've yet to properly design a board game, but the one game I started off with was one of my least favorite themes happens to be area control. And I thought, well, let's just quickly make a game. And I happen to make it. And I've already gone through like 6 iterations. It's gone very well with people. And I've just yet to release it because, I don't know, I think it needs a bit more to it. I mean, it works, but there's a few more things I want to do with it. And to be honest, there's some other games that I'd perhaps rather release first, if I happen to. Okay. So, no, it's just happens to be one of those things. What's your view on conflicts and stuff like that? I guess we don't talk about your position for Fall of Rome.
I mean,
what's your general view on? Okay,
it's definitely up there for me. I mean, and I like that they went for something different. Like they could just re-release that, new Pandemic skins. I mean, I think that Take a Deride kind of falls into this a little bit. They play with the mechanisms a little bit, but like, so a lot of the maps play out with like basically the same, but like one new mechanism. I appreciate that Pandemic has tried to kind of break the mold a little bit, and with the historical ones, and like each Pandemic breaks the mold. You can see the guts of it, but like it goes in a very different direction. So I just kind of, as a general rule, it's like, all right, give me something different. And so I'm a little bit more friendly to that. And then when we get to Rome, I'll explain some of the things about like why I specifically like it. But yeah, no, Rome is good. Okay, so my number 11 is Pandemic Hot Zone. So Pandemic Hot Zone, I'm actually going to combine the North American and the European. They combine. They work generally the same. The characters all interact. So like you can actually own both. And like you have your miniature researcher and your miniature scientist in the North America, and then your miniature like containment specialist in Hot Zone and Europe, and that works fine. So if you don't know what Hot Zone is, I keep on saying miniature. It is miniature Pandemic. There's only 3 diseases, not 4. They took out some of the kind of event cards, and there's a lot of like ways in which they just shrunk down the experience. They wanted to give you Pandemic for $20. And hey, that's really what it is. Pandemic for 20 bucks, or even less if you get it like, through a Target sale or whatever it is. So I get what they were going for. It just leaves me a little bit cold. And I have tried playing it. And for, I think part of the magic of Pandemic is like a regular size board. Like, having that world spanning adventure is a part of the draw. So like I can see people wanting the shorter time, but you want to give people something. You don't want to just give them like a shorter, a smaller, more kind of confined experience. You want the whole. If you're going to be sitting there playing a board game, you want to give them the whole thing. So again, not bad. I'd say it's like 6.5, 7 area around there. I own them because I'm a sucker. But I don't know if I can say, okay, you must go out and get this. This is a good supplement to Pandemic. I don't know. Your mileage may vary on that one.
Cool. So I did split them out, and I wasn't planning to, but I did, and Jason's aware of it in advance. So my hot in North America is also a 7 out of 10, and it's also my number 11 as well. And when I first played it, I initially thought, oh, this is going to be just quite a weak Pandemic. But actually, I realized, including the teach, which doesn't take a long once you've played the game before, we got through it as a 2 in about 11 minutes. We happened to win the game. And I mean, if we lost, you can lose games very quickly. But we happened to win. It was so quick to play. I didn't mind the size of the board, the size of the cards. And actually, the fact that I can take it anywhere, I thought was really fascinating. And I generally like to play some games fast. So I know Steve's aware that I've played like a Zool in 9 minutes and 7 Wonders in 7 minutes, and even Ticket to Ride New York in 80 seconds, because I just bashed it through like that. So in terms of playing some games really quickly, it means I can play more games. I can play the same game multiple times as well and experience different things. I like to alternate my characters. So with Andor, I like to ensure that I try all the different fate cards and stuff like that. So for me, I actually was surprised that I've got the same game in a smaller box, similar to Ticket to Ride. And whilst I agree with the immersion, I mean, they talk about epics, being 3-hour+ games, you need that duration. I sometimes feel that, and games such as, great co-op such as Dead of Winter, very immersive. But actually, the inverse can also be true. If you want to, you've got 20 minutes and it is someone who hasn't played it before, then you can play it on your lunch break, compared to Pandemic, where you probably won't be able to teach it and get through it if you're probably going to win it. So I actually was very impressed with, it did pass that green lighting stage of, yes, it's a smaller version, but it still worked. But that's, I now know we're probably going to get out of sync possibly, but maybe there's a chance you could talk about expansions if we get back into it. But yeah, that's our number 11.
All right. So we're going to get more Hot Zone talk. I do appreciate what you said about the lunch break game. I appreciate that. I don't have a work situation where I can have that, capacity to just sit down and play lunch, but that would be interesting because you can't play the big, like the regular base Pandemic. You can't play lunch. That's not going to happen. So no, that's interesting perspective. I may consider re-rake, but although I don't know, like there's some strong ones above this.
Okay. Space as well. Although, anyway, come back to that.
So now we're getting to our top 10s. So my 10th is the game, if you're looking on the video, right on the bottom of the stack, Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu. So that's 7 out of 10 for me. And I think it's Pandemic and it's pretty good. I think what makes this kind of trail the pack a little bit for me is what they meant, right? They wanted this to be a shorter, punchier, a swingier Pandemic. It's Cthulhu, so you want the monsters, and you want like a feeling of unsettledness, so the game is going one way, and in like all the Pandemic games you kind of get a momentum, right? But in Cthulhu, more things can happen that kind of take stuff away from you. You have giant monsters that kind of like spawn somewhere or spawn nowhere. A game could really end in 7 minutes if you're not paying attention, or you can just blow through it and it's like, oh wow, that was easy. And then so there's so much variance in it, and I'm glad it's there, and I'm happy to play it. At 7 out of 10 is a good grade for me. It's just that sometimes the swinginess can be really difficult for me to handle as a game experience. So that's just kind of like right there, but it's good.
Okay, cool. So my number 10 is very interesting. It's Rising Tide. So it's also that kind of trilogy, I think it is, of I think key rethemed pandemics, I guess. So let's talk about times throughout history, apart from Fall of Rome, which was, and I do, by the way, Fall of Rome, I love Paolo Mori, big fan of Augustus and stuff like that, and I've got more of his games still unplayed, so I'm still can play them. The following is an 8 out of 10 though for me, Rising Tide. I found it very easy and normal. I really quite like the windmill things. I mean, being at number 10 isn't particularly high for Pandemic, but the idea of getting these pumping stations is very crucial, I think integral to making sure that you have these dams and they're filling up and you're having to pump water around. I kind of got into it. I didn't like it much. I think the more I played it, the more I enjoyed it, and the more I kind of worked out the puzzling nature of actually how you don't lose and how you then work with various different things. Some of the downsides, though, which I'm sure you're going to also be aware of, is some of the spellings of Dutch places, like with versions of Dutch Ticket to Ride. It's like, where on earth are these places? And it's very unlike Ticket to Ride, where you actually have a kind of a small little map to show you where things are. It can be a bit frustrating. You get to learn a lot about Dutch geography, but it is a bit it is a bit much to try and actually understand how to pronounce these things when you're trying to say who's got whatever it is, which sounds like a Cthulhu word, but we'll come on to that.
Which our
So
Dutch listeners are going to be like, well, it sounds like Cthulhu to you.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first pandemic game that I had played in terms of like messing with the meta, right? It was the first pandemic game because okay, so Iberia came out and it was kind of pandemic-y, right? They did some changes, but very recognizable the system. Rising Tide was the first one where I was like, okay, you're not dealing with disease anymore, you're dealing with water. And the cubes are, they fulfill the function of disease, but now they're water and they act like water. So they're not going to just like appear in random places. They're gonna flow from the inside. And so I'll say more about that. But in terms of kind of breaking expectations, I really appreciated that Rising Tide. They gave me something very different and very unexpected. Then I'll talk about like how much I received that in a little bit. So that was number 10. That was number 10.
Yep.
All right.
And lastly, I guess in terms of Rising Tide, it's sometimes harder to predict where things are going. Like when you see pandemic cubes, like, boom, I need to deal with Chicago, whatever it might be. But it's slightly harder. Sometimes it's like, do you know what? I can let that go for a while because it just works a bit differently, but it's a bit harder to plan out. I'm not saying people don't spot that, but it's interesting anyway.
All right. So my number 9, our first disagreement. We're going 8 and above now. So we got through the stuff that I would be happy to play, but whatever. Here now I'm excited to play. So it is my number 9 is Pandemic the Cure. So I combine that with the experimental meds expansion. So I rarely play a Pandemic the Cure without, unless I'm playing with total newbies. So I mean, I like the dice. I like the. I mean, I have definitely struggled to introduce the board game to people, but had more success with the dice game. I think on some level, people understand the dice, especially if you're not a regular hobby gamer. If you're a hobby gamer, it's whatever. But like if you're not, and I've introduced it to people who are not, and I introduced it. I'm a psychotherapist, so I've actually played this game in therapy with people. Just explore the headspace of like disease and all that kind of stuff. They like the dice. They understood the dice. They understood like the rolling and constantly flowing in dice and everything. So and it gives you that pandemic flavor. It does the short-term, long-term thing pretty well. Can you lose? Yes. Can you lose unfairly? Yes, because you have too many biohazards. So people have a problem with that. But I think the game is quick enough to where like losses, you could just kind of shuffle again and go. And the game does do some mitigation things, so you're not like completely hosed. So I just think it's a really solid package. Like I can understand like your perspective, like why it didn't hit for you, but because I'm thinking about it in terms of like how useful it has been for me, rather than like,
Exactly.
am I going to play a pandemic for myself? I will not. Like if I had this whole pile, open to me, I'm not choosing the Cure first. That is not happening. But in terms of its uses and the way that I've been able to use it with other people, then I really appreciate it. So Pandemic the Cure is my number 9.
So in terms of my view on the Cure, yes, I do agree with the idea of dice, and they're very, I think, tactile, easy to read. Obviously, you don't have to worry about cards and the orientation of them and what's written on the rest of the card. Obviously, you can then roll them. You can quickly see what you're doing with them. And I can see how the experience lends itself very well to what your enjoyment you've got out of playing the Cure. And similar to when you go traveling, perhaps, or whatever you might be doing, but ultimately the experience you're getting out of feeding off those other people is very strong, and obviously what you can decide how you enjoy the board game. So in terms of my number 9, it's again, you've already mentioned, it's very highly swingy. It is Cthulhu. I found nearly all the Cthulhu games are very swingy. This one, thankfully, not as much as some others. I've played Arkham Horror, played the card game, etc. Eldritch Horror, I still very much want to play. But for me, I did give it an 8 out of 10. It's gone up a few times, actually, for me. I think Cthulhu. It is found it very easy on easy and on normal mode, though, which isn't a bad thing. Of course, similar to, I guess, Rising Tide, you do need to be familiar with your locations, Dulwich, etc. But the idea of chasing is quite a nice idea, an idea that you can shoot things in a way. I think that's quite cool. And it's a game that, well, when they see the idea of Cthulhu, all right, sure, I'll play that. And suddenly it's quite this puzzly game where you're moving around. It might trip people up, but equally, I think it does work quite effectively. So that's my number 9. We both tick those off now.
All right. So, I mean, I think we generally agree on some of the stuff that goes on in them. And it's like consensus, right? I mean, I think that if you look at the trend line of pandemic releases, so it's like, okay, if Cthulhu was this thing. We would have seen like expansions for Cthulhu or reiterations of Cthulhu, but it's like I think it's there and it's fine.
Yeah,
People move on, and I like use the different systems for Cthulhu.
yeah,
So now we're gonna get into and none of us have mentioned Legacy, so I imagine that Legacy is gonna be
no,
like pretty high on the list for both of us. Okay, so
yeah,
my number 8 is Pandemic Iberia, which makes some people mad because when people say like, okay, Pandemic, something else, the first one they usually mention is Iberia. And I going off of the solo games list, the solo games, Iberia is actually pretty highly ranked, relative to the other pandemics. I think, I mean, I know why the Iberia works for people. Like it's in that the historical game, and it has this innovative thing where you're building railroad tracks. And at the beginning, you can't really go anywhere, but by the end, you're flying around. And it is very satisfying to be able to kind of like build towards mobility and power. So you feel very powerful by the end of the game of Iberia. So I get that. It's just for me, I don't know. Like it just wasn't different enough. Like I'm already flying around if I just got a card in regular Pandemic. So it's like, it doesn't give me that much of a different feeling. So, I mean, obviously it's great. It's like, it's an excellent game. It's one of those things where it's like, I'm comparing excellent games. So I want to be very clear. But in terms of how I rank at these excellent games, where is Iberia a little bit of a hair short of some of the other ones? It's that like, okay, the hook of it didn't hook me as solidly as the hook of some of the other ones. So doesn't mean it's bad. I would love to play Iberia anytime. So then that is my number 8.
right. So my number 8 is a game that you haven't spoken about yet, I believe. It is World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. I'll be talking to you more about
It's
my
there
views
right there. I like it.
So yeah, this is the first of only 2 that I'm showing you. I do have others, but not presently here. And yeah, Wrath of the Lich King has very spiky miniatures. It happens to be a game that is a theme I'm not really interested in necessarily. I did used to consult for Activision Blizzard, but for me, whilst it is too easy on easy mode and too easy on normal mode, the Abomination mode is ridiculously hard. You can't even complete a single quest, but it's a nice kind of challenge. The fact it's got 4 difficulty modes, not just 3. And obviously that penultimate level as well is rather worth going for. The fact you do have these side quests, I think is really cool. Yes, it does have this tower defense, which is kind of what Pandemic has anyway. But the fact it can split you up, sometimes keeps you together. It's a solo game as well, so you can two-hand the game of Pandemic, which I never have. I never two-handed a co-op unless it has a specific solo mode. But the fact it has a nice little thumb punch board thing that you can move along, I think it's really effective. I've played through every character, I've played through every quest and everything else too. My rating is, I think, 8.02. And yeah, because it's all about this harder modes. It's immersive. I've since watched the film, and I think because of that, I actually quite like the film more than anticipated. So that's been my number 8.
So let's go on to my number 7. Mentioned already, Pandemic Fall of Rome. Right up top, I just did a playthrough, which should be coming up on the One Stop Co-op Shop. It hasn't been released already; it'll be released pretty soon. Fall of Rome. Again, I like when Pandemic takes risks with their system. I think the system is stable enough to like. I recognize the Pandemic guts of it, but then I vibe with the innovations and the fact that it is evoking that war game sense. And I think I like the troop movement here. Like I like the troop movement. That's a draw for me. I think that's not a draw for others because it's a little bit more, you have to, it's you have lines and they're coming from usually Central Europe and they're all drifting towards Rome. So then you have to place cubes in this weird way where they're all connected. And if there's a city but there's no reinforcements next to the city, you have to kind of draw back along the line. And I could see that being a little bit of a frustration for people. But for me, it's the absolute draw. Like I love the idea of, and well, you'll see this in the playthrough that I did. Like there was one faction, there's always one faction that kind of escaped contain. And like I just couldn't stop them from entering Rome, and they eventually entered Rome. And so like there's 5 factions that I'm trying to like kind of beat back the different ones. And then the fact that I couldn't do it all, like I didn't have enough fingers for the dike that was bursting. I get that feeling every time from Pandemic. And they implement the dice, but the dice are very forgiving. There's only one side that's a miss, and everything else is exciting. So they kind of figured out a way to put in dice that feel good and are exciting, but it isn't like punishing. I just think the whole thing is great. I really do. I really enjoy Pandemic Fall of Rome. So that's my number.
Yeah, I do like the chaining. Because I do like Andor, and I like I mean, anything with the chains, you do have to keep an eye out. You do want to break those chains. You do want to be aware of other factions. You do want to be conscious of the fact that, oh, that person's doing really well. We need to boss on them. And sometimes it feels like, oh, because I'm in the lead, do I really need to be bossed on? But a good point about the dice as well. I mean, the dice in World of Warcraft as well is really strong as well. And it's the first and only game, I think, which doesn't have the word pandemic in the title, which nearly sort of slipped off us even talking about it, I think.
I would never, a pandemic game system. They put that pretty obviously on the box.
Oh, yeah. But in terms of if you go on Board Game Geek, you can't just immediately sign, and unless you go to the family under the series. So now I know, and this has always been the case, there always has to be an underdog. And everyone has to pin. This is why board games are so opinionated. There's so many different things out there. Someone's going to like something more than others. But we are talking about a legacy one now. So, and I mean, well, yeah, it could be one position higher, but I'll come on to that later. So the reason why this one, and I'll tell you which one it is in a second, is my rating is 8.038. It's a great story. Very much enjoy it. It's the first one in the series. And lots of people think, right, well, why is it only this low down, considering the fact that there's so much novelty going on? And whilst it is so novel and it is a legacy game, and that looks very strong, like I said, this is a very highly rated game for me. There are just other things I'll talk to you about in the other ones without obviously spoiling it for anyone who hasn't played them. But that is something that I give. And 6 is still very, very high. And I'll talk to you why I like some of the other legacy ones as well in a bit. But yeah, I think that wraps up our number 7.
That was number 7. So what I'll say about season 1, talk about innovation. I think season 1 had the story and it borrowed a lot of mechanisms from the existing expansions. So it's like, I felt like I was playing 12 games of a game that I already have with those types of expansions and some other tweaks too. It wasn't like there was some original stuff they did, but they definitely borrowed a lot. And they put in the story. So like if you were gripped by the story and you September, that whole thing that happens, yeah, absolutely. I could see, but if you're looking for something slightly different, then I could see Pandemic 1 kind of falling off, and because I think 2 and 0 definitely went off on different directions, and they were pretty exciting. So yeah, so I haven't even mentioned the legacy game yet, but so they are definitely coming. I love them. Okay, so my number 6 is World of Warcraft. So we're at number 6. We're at number 6. Okay. So World of Warcraft, you mentioned it before, one-handed. It is literally the only pandemic game that you can one-hand because it does something very different with the cards. So the cards in Pandemic, you have to collect the sets of cards. So you have to have a lot of cards available to you. So that requires, either one-handed or like there's an official solo for the basic game. And it's like, but you have to kind of maintain a separate hand of cards and switch between them. And it's like, why am I doing that? In World of Warcraft, the cards are only useful for triggering your powers. And in order to quote unquote kind of do the cures, that's the quests. The quests are, and you just do them and that's like a place you go, there's dice rolls and everything. So I just appreciate that. It's as a gamer sensibility thing, as a usability thing. I like being able to kind of put my Pandemic down, have my one hand, control my 3 characters and go. It's fun. And the game is super fun. Like you have moments of like the game does flood the zone with zombies, but it gives you powers to be able to counter the zombies. I like that. So I like when games give me like 5 zombies in a turn. It's like mid-game, but then I have a power that lets me wipe out 7 if I position myself correctly. Like that too. My only hesitation with this game is that I think the quests are really boring. Like I think that going to the area and like roll, I think that's boring. I think there was room for something a little bit more innovative. Do the same thing because I like the quest. I'm a big World of Warcraft guy. I was. So I get as Joel Narub and the Nexus, and that's me. So going to the Nexus and seeing it as like a card full of numbers, roll, for me, missed opportunity. So that's my only difficulty with it. Otherwise, I was really surprised at how much I liked it.
Yeah, sharing the cards, going to the same location and being able to share your cards to do it is very effective, whether that be solo or otherwise. I think, and I mentioned, I've played through all the characters, all the quests, and it's nice to combine them and just see how they work. But in terms of, I can kind of agree that the sameness of the boredom, but maybe it's just it's all about the rush. Do you need to rush to try and complete that quest, which ideally you should, or do you need to jump out of there and deal with it? Because the longer you stay there, there are some negative effects. But generally speaking, you just want to get that quest done because you can't complete the major quest until these side quests are done. So yeah, that's a factor for me. And onto my 6. It's the only expansion which I've got here, only because I've kind of played it this on its base game as it is kind of thing. It's the base game plus something on top, and that's On the Brink. Now, strangely, I've played the one with the 5th cure, 5th disease, and the other one, the only one I haven't played, which is the one that I think is the best, it seems, but I haven't played it yet, is the Bioterrorist. But great options. So maybe that's a chance for you if you want to just fill in this little gap. Well, we've actually done it now anyway, is we could always talk about, because otherwise we're going to get out of sync, any of the other expansions, but it probably makes more sense to us do it when we get on to our number 1 or 2 or 3 whenever we need to. But
okay, I mean, we'll talk about because I didn't rate the expansion separately, so I can comment about them now. So there's 3 expansions, and I did playthroughs on the One Stop Co-op Shop. I get to advertise those things. I did an expansion for a playthrough for the On the Brink with the virulent strain, this is the 5th disease, and the mutations. So like the adjusted disease, like this a little bit harder to cure.
Yeah.
I played in the lab with the lab board, and I played the in the hinterlands with the hinterlands and the superbug and all that kind of thing. So I've played all the expansions, and they're all on the One Stop Co-op Shop. And I don't know, I think it's more of like in the aggregate thing. I like having them there. I don't know that any particular expansion, except for maybe the lab one. I think if one module stands out, it's the lab because it's so thematic. You take the disease and you put it in the thing, and you're using your actions and you're doing all that. So like, if I'm going to select, like if I was doing this list of like, okay, I'm going to make the expansion separate, it would probably be the lab expansion, not so much the On the Brink. But I think if you're getting into Pandemic, On the Brink is a necessary purchase because you get the more rolls and you do get a little bit of an extra mold. So in terms of getting into Pandemic, On the Brink is definitely one you're going to want to get.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. I think, I think the way you can mix things around is really interesting, and how you can handle those. It almost feels like Dinosaur Island or something like that. It's could be quite interesting to see what you can do with how else they could then reinvent it, which almost does sound like hybridizing it. But just covering your cough there, which is very well covered. So good. All right. So now we're up to number 5.
5. All right. So my number 5 is Legacy Season 2. So Legacy Season 2, I think the least well-regarded of the legacies. And for different reasons, I think there was like Legacy Season 2 went in a very different direction. Legacy Season 1, like I said was before, was like, okay, it felt like Pandemic 12 times or 18 times, however many you played. Season 2 really tried to go in a different direction. I had Matt and Rob on the show to talk about what they did, and they really wanted to try to do something different because they didn't just want to repeat the same thing over and over again. So I like the result. I think there was some difficulty in the kind of April area, like March, April. They weren't as obvious as they could have been in terms of where to go. So a lot of people lost uselessly. So that became frustrating. And the games themselves were super long. Like, we're talking hour-and-a-half games of Pandemic. Yeah. And I think people are not in for that. They're just not. It's not that it's not a system that can accommodate sitting there for 90 minutes and puzzling things out. So I think 2 was, I could see why people had difficulty with 2. I think the good things that 2 did, which were the reversed mechanism where like I'm putting supply down. And I think the story was cool. And I think the expanding world was cool. And ... when it comes to the story, I won't spoil anything. So it did enough good things for me to be very, very highly ranked, but I can understand why other people are a little bit more disconnected from it.
Cool. Well, it's not in the same position as you, so obviously it's higher, but I will mirror your thoughts, which you put very succinctly about the fact that it is longer, and I've played it as a 3 and as a 4, and with different groups. And as a 4, for example, it can be 2.5 hours you're puzzling over stuff. And when you're driving, sometimes in this instance, because our group kind of moved away, we were driving over 2 hours, and then you're getting back at 3 a.m. or something because when it finishes, and we're thinking, oh, we'll get through 2 games of it tonight, and we get through 1. And the idea of the reverse mechanism is really interesting because it is different, and it is like, how on earth do I get my head around this? And I was actually at very short notice called up to be a Pandemic judge at tournaments. Oh, but the trouble was, I'd just come from playing Pandemic Legacy Season 2. I was like, whoa, it was like, is this right? Are they doing? And of course, my mind was completely in the wrong space about how that should be doing it. So it is very different. And we'll talk about more when I go into it. But hopefully, if anything else I did, oh yeah, the story. Yeah, the story is really good. Very, very varied, very much enriching as well. And I think that's like one reason why I felt season 1 was very linear. I actually felt it didn't branch much, for example, compared to season 2. I felt season 2 had more of a branch to it. But we'll come back to that. So this is number 5, I believe, is actually Base Pandemic. I'm sure that's one that you've got on here too. 8.59. It wasn't always as fun, but it's solid and good, and I've enjoyed playing it on hard mode. In particular, I found actually hard mode can be easier than easy mode because your clustering is very much more focused on where things are. So it's interesting how it's come about, and it took me, I think, at least 7 games to maybe win it on. I don't know if it was easy or pretty hard. But then I went to this Comic-Con event and I've been playing with somebody who was just a genius at it. And he goes, oh yeah, play on hard mode. And we played it 7 times back to back. We won it every time on hard mode. I give all the credit to this other guy. And it was dressed like some kind of like dojo warrior because it was in like in cosplay. But it's just like, wow, the stuff I learned from that guy is just incredible. And yeah, no, it's just an incredible game. Obviously, it's as high as it is for me, and it's obviously even higher for you because of what it's done. You know, it's 14 years old now. And yeah, it's fantastic. So little more to say. I'm sure you've got a lot more to say. I'll leave it for you there. That's my number 5.
My number 4 is finally, we get to it, our biggest divergence of clearly Rising Tide. So I really, really love what Rising Tide is doing. I love the water. The water is very evocative. You mentioned before the windmills. So the windmills definitely break up the rhythm. So like you get into Pandemic and there's a rhythm to it. It's like, you know, you take your actions and you draw your cards and you put the diseases, and then if there's an epidemic, whatever. And a lot of the pandemics flow through that same rhythm. Rising Tide breaks that up with the windmills, and windmills are really important because if you don't do your windmills properly, and you know, then they're gonna it's gonna mess you up. So it's kind of reflective. I think that one of the Splotter guys helped redesign. So like, okay, we need to put more crunch in this thing. I could definitely tell that decision. And also the graphic design is difficult because it's hard to see where the different zones are because the way they drew a little bit more of a topographical map, where I think a cleaner, you know, even if it was uglier, like a cleaner version would have been more usable. Right. So then there's a couple things that went into what made Rising Tide a little bit more difficult for people. For me, I don't know. Like I don't care. It just, you know, just the fact that you think of those different spaces and the way the water acts. I just love how evocative the water is. I love the puzzle of it. I get what you're saying. Like once you kind of, like, I think a lot of pandemics are that way. Like once you kind of solve it, like these are quote unquote solvable games.
Yeah.
So I don't care. Like I'm there to have fun, and every once in a while the game will bite me in the butt when I'm, you know, a little too overconfident. But no, I'm the Rising Tide is easily my favorite historical game. And then is one of my favorite pandemic games in general. It is number 4.
Sure, fantastic, very cool. So for my number 4, it's a game that you've already mentioned. You've already bundled it together. It is Hot Zone Europe. It's going to be 9 out of 10. So the reason why I was really surprised by this one because they're not the main characters. I mean, my favorite character is the generalist, just because it's so efficient. And that's obviously, and that's in North America. So when I had these characters, I'm like, Now this might be because I know that, for example, Ticket to Ride Europe is very popular, maybe in Europe because it's Europe, maybe it's North America, and maybe this is because it's, I don't know, because actually Europe's my least favorite Ticket to Ride. I played all the Ticket to Rides, and Europe's my least favorite because Push Your Luck and Set Collection, which makes kind of no sense in a way. But in this instance, with what I'm really discovering, what I'm really liking about Hot Zone Europe is the fact you actually have characters I would not normally play with.
Right.
Now you do get some of them in, I think season 2, for example, or stuff like that, and Quarantine Specialists, things like that, which are a bit more prominent than they are in the original base game, especially if you've got the original Pandemic. But for me, again, I'm having a chance to play through these characters more frequently as well, because again, it's a shorter game. It's a nice half-size board. We can whip through it very quickly, and that's something else whereby it's just quick. I can just play it, and I'm fully immersed into it. I could lose this game, and I've got, well, I could have 3 hours or so if I want to spend 3 hours over it, but in about 20 minutes, whatever, I could be trying to do it. And yes, so in terms of that divergence, perhaps even more so. But I mean, yeah, you knew it was going to be there somewhere. That is the other game which I was trying to grab, but it's so small I can't even find it right now. So there's that one. So yeah, that's my number 4. Like I said, oh, Hemispheres. Have you played Hemispheres? I haven't tried mixing them together. No. So yeah, it's for me. It's Pandemic, but it's small. I can, if I want to. There are games whereby I can go straight in and play a bigger version. But if I want to quickly play a game with someone, hey, do you want a quick game of Pandemic? Let me show you how it plays. Great. And there's no need to actually go from that to teaching them the rules for playing the full version, other than it's just an extra cube. And that's great for me, at least. Just, I think it's the kind of groups I'm in, a variety of groups. It just happens a lot. I mean, there's over 90 plus venues you can see on Instagram. I'm at a year. So it's loads of different venues, about 2,500 different people that I'm gaming with. And it's just handy to know that I've got the efficiency of saying small game, small box, rather than carrying fewer games, I guess is one way of putting it. So that's my number 4 into a bronze position now.
Yeah. I mean, it's like having a jar full of rocks, and the games are like sand. And you can just put into sand at any time. And that's really, really cool to do. Okay, so my number 3 is Legacy Zero. So Legacy Zero was fantastic. Oh my god. And it's funny it's hard to talk about the legacies because you want to spoil stuff. Zero was a callback, right? As Zero felt more familiar. That the 2 released, and then I think with Zero they wanted to just kind of end it on a bang, and it's like, okay, all right, we're gonna go back to what we know, and it's a spy thriller, and it does this thing. I think the character mechanism was fabulous in terms of, so in season 1 you had the multiple characters, right? And let's say if you got one character, then you lost the ability to play the other character. You had to keep them in the box. And that was difficult for people. What they saw was that people just stuck with their characters. Even if the scenario said, okay, this other character would be better, it's like, no, I've put the upgrades on this one, I'm attached to this one, I'm playing this one. And so they're like, okay, how can we do that in Zero? How can we give them that a kind of split difference? And they came up with this passport system. So like, you could be a loyalist loyalist American, loyalist Russian, Cold War game, or neutral. And those are all 3 things that you could be. And you could use an action to flip between those all those loyalties. So you never had to be without your character. You didn't lose immersion. You didn't lose attachment to it. Brilliant. And the fact that it kind of, and it had like, it was familiar, but they added different things with like the tanks and, other stuff going on. The story was also good. Just you could definitely tell that this was the most tightly designed.
Yeah.
All lessons were learned, and obviously that's obvious to say, but it's nice to see it. And my friend made this comment when we were playing, we would come with a rules question, and the rules question was always in the book. Like it was always answered. Oh, by the way, if you run into this, do this. And you rarely see that in games. A lot of times you have to kind of go to the FAQs or, write a question. I did not find a single question that was not already answered in the rule book, which is amazing. So really tightly designed game, really fun story. Season 0, my number 3.
I think it's also, so it's not my number 3, so just let you know, but in terms of the narrative, fantastic narrative. Occasionally I felt I don't know, there's bits like at the end of a chapter where I might say, oh, what's going to happen to this person? And I felt, all right, well, it's foregone conclusion. I don't know what it's going to do, but it is what it is. In terms of duration, I'd say it's probably in between 2 and 1 in terms of how long each mission probably takes. I think, I know after Pandemic Legacy Season 1, they're planning to release the next one within maybe 14 to maybe 18, maybe 16 months. But then I think Z-Man said, look, we'll give you 3 years. We want you to give this a good push. Do not rush it. Have as long as you need. And that's why they led to this 3-year cycle. And yeah, I can see what you mean about the story. I like the way they kind of kept some narrative across all 3 without spoiling it. Literally, I like to only talk about what's I can tell you from the back of the box. That's generally as far as I like to go with it, in terms of the story itself. So yeah, that's that. In terms of my number 3, what do we have here? It's Iberia. So it's 9.06
Wow.
on hard. So on hard mode, we've never only ever played on hard mode. And the very first game of it, we're only one card away from victory. And I was the railroad dude. So yes, I very much like route building. I like the idea that you can move along. I know you can fly, I guess, because of when it was set, maybe you can't and all the rest. But it's nice to kind of see that path. Yes, that track can be a bit annoying, but yeah, it stands out. It's strangely, I would say I'd still rather play, well, probably unsurprisingly, my 2 and 1s first. But that's how it is. And yeah, that's my number 3.
All right, so not too much surprise. So we're getting down to the nitty-gritty for number 2 and 1. My number 2 is season 1 of Legacy. So for all the reasons that I've said, I mean, it was I think it was ranked number 1 on BGG for a long time for a reason. It came out of nowhere. Like, this is awesome, like we know pandemic, we know this stuff. Wow, I actually built progression into it and the changing board and everything. And it's been so long since I've played it, so it's hard to like it. My tendency is to be like, okay, it's been so long since I played it. The memories start to fade, so to speak. And it's like, okay, should it be dropping a little bit to make room for the North? But then I have to remember, how did I feel in the moment? How did I feel at the time with all the reveals? How did I, the excitement, the group text, when can we play next? When can we play next? I remember that excitement, or I try to hold on to that memory, and just the feelings that game generated. Second to none. Second to none. So like, other games made me feel differently, and I was very excited to play everything. But like, just the pure like, next turn, let's do this now. I think I don't think any of the other products have beaten season 1. So it is a 9.5 out of me for me. So it's just amazing.
Cool. So yeah, I fully agree with that. I remember, I think for all the pandemic legacies, they've been around 5 to 7 months, I guess, in duration to kind of play them. There were some obviously some legacy games prior to that. Obviously, it started obviously with Risk Legacy, which I've still yet to play, but I want to play that one. I've played about 15 legacy games at this point, but I've very much enjoyed pandemic legacy seasons. And my number 2, it is season 0. So 9.7, more in depth, even more rules, deep theme, improving. And yeah, for me, it's getting better and better and better. I mean, for me, I happen to play as a 2. It's the only of the pandemics I've played as a 2 specifically. Very enjoyable to, yes, you don't have to swap characters, but generally whichever group I've been in, we always have done. And that's been very effective. Cool.
All right, so now we're at number 1, and it is base pandemic for me. So this box right here, and if you've seen the playthroughs, my cards are beat to high heaven. And the reason I don't sleeve them, and I should sleeve all the cards, is that I wouldn't be able to fit everything in the box. And I'm not one of these people that needs to have pristine games. Like, the games exist to be loved for me. And if I'm going to play them, and if they're going to be a game in my regular rotation, I don't care, as long as they're not trash. A well-worn game is fine. And the fact that so the reason why it's number 1 for me at the end of the day, it's like, okay, the whole, like, what is it? 5 games for Doomsday by Ben Maddox. So it's like, if all of my games fell into a fire and there was a zombie apocalypse and I could only have one game, one product in the back seat, it's not going to be a legacy game because I'm going to run out at the end of the day. So that game is going to be this very box of Pandemic, the one that fits all the expansions, all 3 of the base expansions. And so I'm going to have different varieties of games that I can play, because I can play the different things. I can play tons and tons of roles. And if I want to play with a brand new person who has never played Pandemic before, I would be very happy. Like you mentioned before, I definitely vibe with other people's experience. I can have fun if other people are having fun. So even though I am thoroughly bored by base Pandemic, I can still have fun in the eyes of another. Just lay out the base one, play the regular thing, and I will guide a new player through it. But if it's just me, I'll play the expansions. So much fun in this one box, which is why it is basic Pandemic with the expansions is my number 1 Pandemic.
You should have got like a Gloomhaven box and put them all inside that one, or something. So firstly, thank you very much, obviously, for hosting. Unfortunately, I've had some weird, unexpected video crashes. I don't know what has caused them. It's a -1 error, whatever that is, with a square bracket parentheses. Never seen it before. Jason hasn't, but he's been very obliging and stitching together about 8 of these videos. So hopefully he won't edit out my number 1, because you can probably work out what it is.
There it is.
I have played through it twice. Why is it number 1? It's the fact that you are mainly building routes. The fact that I can go from San Francisco to New Mexico, wherever it might be. And it's the fact that I can go, look, we've never done this route before. It's unique, it's new, but it's more efficient based on where we have diseases. For me, the idea that you can solve something quicker. Yes, the inverseness isn't necessarily good, but actually it feels quite cathartic to place down cubes. I don't know what it is, just getting it out of your hand. It just seems better than having to fiddle up and grab them and look for where they are. So actually seeing what you need to get down is great. And I've played it in different groups. I've played it like at the same time, in fact. And if ever there's a case whereby someone might think I might know something, I'll say, look, no, up to you. You choose what we do next. So very much enjoyed that. Very much enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed, well, it's very hard, most people find. So I know lots of people have penalized it for that. I won it with one group. I lost it with one group. So that's one of the biggest things about it. Strangely, it's like, oh no, it's too hard, I'm rating it low. And I think that's a bit unfair. It's just because I don't know if people were very much expecting that. It is a lot harder game. And if you lose that first game, it's not surprising. And even if second game, and you could lose a few games in a row, and sometimes you go, oh, and sometimes I'm not that pessimistic kind of person, but when you're hearing so many people groaning, it just gets you on your nerves a bit when you're like, all right, well, let's just play the game and see, and don't have that affect you. So I think that's a big factor for people, because I know very few people do rate it as their favorites. But the idea, like I said, and there are different ways you can play the game, and there's different strategies, I think, behind how you can choose to solve it. I think there are tertiary levels of puzzle solving going on in season 2, which are great to discover. So many different things, the way you're dealing with cards, the way you're dealing with that board, the way you can move across that board. And there's those little Easter eggs as well that I found, which I find really interesting. And it's just something you come with more plays.
Yeah. Okay, so if I were to go back and play a legacy game, I'll play all 3 of them happily. Yeah. But the one I look forward to the most would be 2, because of what you said, because of the game will play out a lot differently. You know, and obviously I know where things are now, which that was the problem in the first playthrough. I didn't know where things were, so we got lost and we ended up losing 4 straight games. But they gave you a catch-up mechanism and you kind of got back on track. Now I know where to go, but the geometry will differ and the route building will differ. Yeah. And the way that I might uncover and go down one path in the one game, that's a whole different path. And I think Matt and Rob talked about this on the show. Like, they had to get to the same place. So like by November, it's like, okay, here you go. Whatever you missed, here you go. But at least getting there would be, satisfying and fun. So yeah. I would want to go back to 2. I have plenty to play, so that's not gonna happen anytime soon. Yep. But I would love to go back to 2 anytime. So that's a good choice.
Cool. All right. I'm glad you've got your vibe on that one. And it sounds like it's vindicated, shall we say, season 2 to some degree, because I think that's with people going on there on what it was, not what it could be, or what people obviously are aware of it. And I think that's just how, and I did mention, obviously, I've played a number of these games on these harder modes, and I'm not saying I'm good at them or anything like that. It's just I want to try them all out on all different difficulties. And I prefer to win a co-op than lose a co-op. But equally, if I have won it on easy mode, I mean, I could try and play it again, and I've definitely lost on easy mode on many different games, including the pandemics. But equally, I would prefer to try and have something which is constant peril for me. And if there's, it's a challenge to try and then complete it on normal. If you then do it, it's a challenge to try and complete it on hard. So I do enjoy that. Funny enough, zombie-themed games I generally find it generally easier, apart from the level 8 on number 8 mission on Dead of Winter, which there's the co-op 30 missions, and then there's the non-co-op ones. I think it's the co-op one. It's really darn hard. So there's that too. But we can always do this again on exits or on unlocks. If you
have fun, that's going to be Peter. Peter is a big one into the unlocks. So he'll be happy to rank them all for you.
I'm up to 26 or something, so I can definitely
have fun.
Right. All right, cool. All right, that's handy to know though. And I'll tell you, obviously, I'll tell him if it's a Zoom issue. I'll I'll see what I can do about that. But no, it'd be obviously fascinating to obviously rediscover some of these pandemics with you again, Jason. And yeah, chime off each other. And yeah, look forward to speaking to you on whichever medium we might be about talking about again soon. So,
all right. Tell them where people can contact you.
Sure. So firstly, if you search or Google or whatever Amass Games, that should come up. Ultimately, there've been daily videos for about 3 years now over on YouTube. There are 2,400 posts on Instagram. So just search Amass Games for that on Instagram. There's also Facebook, and there's Board Game Geek, where you can search me under Amass Games. And on Board Game Arena, I'm under Amass Games YouTube. So played all the games on there. So if you want to play me, then that's an option too. So yeah, thanks, Jason.
All right, Simon Lavender, thank you very much for joining the show.
You're welcome. Cheers, Jason. Have a nice day and good afternoon. And also, finally, hopefully the weather doesn't get as hot as it's been. Okay, speak soon.
You can change your mind, you can change. If you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, later, everybody.
Yeah. Bye-bye.